Actually, this one, yeah, I think.
I asked her, should you get that book ready yet?
Oh, yeah. She is.
Thank you very much for coming. The MBTA Communities Info Session Take 2. I'm Mimi Luttrell. I'm the chair of your planning board. And with me is Debbie DeMaria, who's also a member of the planning board. Lisa Braccio is a member of the planning board. Karina Quinn, our town planner. Pauline Stansfield, the business administrator for the planning board. And the star of the day, Lily Link, is the MBTA Communities Engagement Manager from Citizens Housing and Planning Association, and she will be leading us through tonight.
Mimi, welcome. Thank you for having me. I feel so far away from you all that I might wander towards you. So yeah, as Mimi said, thank you for being here. This is our second info session. We held one last week. For anyone who attended that, I do want to make it clear that this will essentially be an identical session. Same information. I made a few tweaks just to clarify some questions people had last time, but you'll be hearing the same things from me. So if we want to pull up the slides, and we'll talk a little bit about what we have in store for us tonight. Right, go to the agenda slide, please. So tonight we're going to be talking a little bit about what zoning is to begin with, and why it's important. We'll talk about what Section 3A is, which is the technical term for the MBTA Communities Act, and why it was passed. We'll talk about what the benefits of multifamily housing are, what the requirements are for Southborough specifically, what this could potentially look like in Southborough, and what the process is going to evolve, how we're going to get from here to the finish line. Slide. So zoning is a code that regulates how we use land, and this includes a number of factors, including the use. So is it residential, commercial, industrial, open space? Things like the shape of buildings, their size and height, the distances required between one use and another, how close can you put industrial to residential. It can also include requirements for things like parking, affordability, open space, setbacks, etc. And ultimately, zoning is a set of rules that determines what is allowed to be built in the future. So it does not require production, and it is often out of sync with what is actually on the ground. So there are probably a lot of properties you know and love very well in your community that were built before our current zoning. So what the zoning is doesn't always actually sync up with what you see. One concept I want to make sure we get to early on, because it can often be a point of confusion. Like I said, zoning is sort of the rules that come with the plot of land. Often they are not reflected in the actual property that is on that parcel. So when we talk about zoning capacity, we're talking about what is allowed according to the law on that piece of land. And so ultimately that capacity is the same regardless of what is actually placed on that parcel. So if you have a parcel that's zoned for up to 4 units, whether you have nothing on the parcel, whether you have 2 units on the parcel, or whether you have 4 units on the parcel, the capacity remains the same. So I want to just make sure that we clarify that, because I know that can often be a point of confusing the difference between what zoning is and what actually building and production is. Okay. And while zoning is this sort of invisible force we don't necessarily see in our day-to-day lives, it is incredibly important and actually has a really significant impact on our communities. By determining what can be built and where, we're also really determining, who can live here, who can work here, who can play and recreate here. And if done correctly, it's an incredibly powerful tool to meet your community goals for housing, sustainability, diversity, transportation. But many communities in Massachusetts still have really stringent and inflexible zoning that makes it essentially impossible to build anything other than a single family home. And when the only thing available to build is a single family home, that pushes out people who either can't afford a single family home or who don't want to live in a single family home. Lots of people are interested in multifamily housing for all kinds of reasons. Older adults who don't want the upkeep of a large single family home, younger couples who are trying to get their foot in the door to home ownership, but aren't ready to make that jump to a single family home, or just don't want to because they enjoy the lifestyle of multifamily living. We also see, I think, one of the most immediate and kind of apparent effects of restrictive zoning, you might also hear it referred to as exclusionary zoning, is the high home prices that we're seeing all across the Commonwealth, but particularly in the central to eastern half of the Commonwealth. Restrictive zoning creates barriers to building new housing, and when there is only so much housing going around, naturally prices are going to skyrocket. So according to Redfin's, as of last week, the median price for a single family home in Southborough is now 1.37 million, which is not accessible to the vast majority of people who live in this state, and even folks who already live here would likely not be able to move here today. People who were born here or moved here 30 years ago would very likely not be able to afford to join your community today. So currently, this is based off of the 2020 census, 1 in 3 renters in Southborough and 1 in 4 homeowners in Southborough cannot afford their current housing costs. Folks are considered to be housing unstable or cost burdened if they're spending more than 30% of their gross income, their pre-tax gross income, on housing. And so in Southborough, 1/3 of renters and 1/4 of homeowners are past that threshold and are paying more for housing than they can really afford. So why was this law, the MBTA Communities Act, also known as Section 3A, passed to begin with? In direct response to these realities that we're seeing on the ground in so many communities. High home prices are pushing out college graduates, young families, older adults, and even people with moderate incomes are really struggling to stay housed in Massachusetts. So this poses a really serious threat to our economy as working families are pushed out. And we actually saw a pretty mass exodus in Massachusetts over the past 3 years of around 300,000 people since the beginning of the pandemic. And home prices were one of the top reasons people chose to leave. So growing a healthy and sustainable regional economy requires housing options at a variety of scales and a variety of price points. And this is really a regional issue. It doesn't rest with any individual community, any individual county. And so as a regional challenge, it requires a regional response. And that was the motivation behind the piece of legislation that was passed in 2020. So what does Section 3A do? Section 3A requires the community designate a zoning district in which multifamily housing near transit is allowed as of right. So what that means is that in many communities, if any multifamily housing is allowed at all, it is often by a special permit process, which requires many more steps, a lot of meetings and permits and various permissions to get to that point of being able to build anything. That creates a lot of barriers, which often makes creating new housing infeasible. So by making it as a right, that shortens the process and enables folks to build housing more affordably. This impacts all 177 MBTA communities that are spread really all across the eastern and central region of the state. You all are our commuter rail community. Of course, you have your station just a couple miles down the road, but this also impacts adjacent communities and small towns that do not actually have a station within their borders, but share a border with a community that does. So this zoning district needs to allow 15 units per acre as of right. The zone has to be of a reasonable size. So, we can't just say, well, this one parcel is now this zoning district. And there cannot be age restrictions on the zoning. So you need to be allowed to build housing. You could build housing that's exclusively for older adults, but you can't say that's the only kind of housing. Additionally, a certain percentage of This district has to be within a half mile of the transit station for communities that have one. Obviously, Southborough does. So when I say multifamily housing, you might have a variety of images in your head. It can take a lot of forms. We often refer to this as missing middle housing because it's meant to provide options for folks who can't afford detached single family houses, but aren't income eligible for affordable housing, people who are right in that middle income. So it can look like duplexes, fourplexes, courtyard buildings where multiple different, kind of modest sized dwellings share one large parcel, townhomes, triple deckers, live workspaces with commercial on the ground floor. It can take a lot of different forms. And a big part of what this process is going to look like, I think, is going to be having a conversation about, what kinds of housing is most appealing to you and how can we potentially shape a district that will encourage the type of housing you would most like to see. So why is this good for Southborough? Well, first of all, Southborough has already committed to improving housing diversity and supporting broader housing goals through the 2019 Housing Production Plan, the 2021 Master Plan, and other town goals. And ultimately, creating more housing means more opportunities, more access, and greater affordability. It means that older adults can downsize and stay in the community. It means that college kids can come home and rent their first apartment, maybe not have to move back in with their parents, as so many are doing these days. Young couples can become homeowners and start families. Low-income families can find housing stability. Middle-income families have more choices. Small businesses can retain employees. Grandparents can stay close to their grandchildren, and we all benefit. So what do the requirements of this law look like in Southborough specifically? So as I said, as you all know, you are a commuter rail community. Your deadline for compliance is December 31st, 2024. So we're about 15 months out from that deadline. Currently, you have 3,763 units in your community. The minimum land area for this zoning district is 50 acres. And at a little later, we will have an image to demonstrate what that actually looks like. Because what is 50 acres really? Most of us probably don't have a crystal clear image of that in our heads, but I know it does say in the FAQ packet, if anyone got it, exactly how that compares to, it is 0.3% of Southborough's land. So this entire district will only take up 0.3% of this entire community. It's actually a very modest size district. And 20% of that 50 acres needs to be located within that half mile of the transit station. So 10 acres should go somewhere within this half circle that I encourage folks to take a look at, and then I think we'll pull up on the screen later. But within that half mile, there are 167 acres to choose from. And I should mention, when we say developable, that does not mean land that doesn't currently have anything on it. It just means land that is not considered to be excluded land. I'll go into in a minute what that includes, but excluded land is things like, your parks and rivers. Obviously you can't zone for housing on top of a river. So when they say developable, that means land within that half mile radius that doesn't have anything on it that would make it impossible to build something on top of it. Yes, and yeah, next slide. Sorry. No, it's okay. I couldn't remember if I had another point. So some other considerations for your district. So around the development requirements, the town can still require site plan review. So moving from a special permit to a by right process does not mean that you do not still have a lot of control over what actually comes into town. So, that site plan review can include standards around mixed use. Do you want to see commercial on the first floor of some of these buildings? Green space requirements, setbacks, height, minimum lot size. All of those are very much within the control and decision making of the town. When it comes to affordability, the town has the option to require that up to 10% of those units be required to be affordable. So any new building that comes along, let's say it's a 20-unit building, 2 of those would be required to be affordable, if you so choose. If you want to go beyond that and have a higher affordability requirement, You can go up to 20% if the town submits an economic feasibility analysis to the state. So that will also be a conversation that, you know, residents can have. Is that something that you want to pursue? So the ineligible land for this district includes all publicly owned land. So the property that we are on right now, rivers, streams, lakes, other bodies of water, wetland resources, as well as a buffer zone around the wetlands. So obviously we don't want to be building up right up to the wetlands. Protected open space and recreational land, public rights of way and private rights of way, privately owned land on which development is prohibited to protecting private or public water, and privately owned land that is used for educational or institutional uses like hospitals, prisons, utilities, museums, private schools, colleges, or universities. I know you have some private schools in town, that land would not be eligible for this. So what does 15 units per acre actually look like? It's not something most people walk around with a clear image of in their head. So we wanted to pull some examples of some existing multifamily housing in Southborough, so you can see sort of how it compares to that 15 units per acre. So here we have a building with 9 homes in it that's on 3/4 of an acre. So that parcel density is 12 units per acre, not quite at the 15, but pretty close. We have a 3-family on the left that's on a 0.15 acre parcel. So that actually exceeds the required density. That's almost 20 units per acre. We have another 3-family that's on a 1/4 acre lot. So the density of units there is about 12. You can see that they take a lot of different forms, shapes, and sizes. Here we have multiple houses on a parcel. So rather than one larger building, it's 2 smaller buildings. There are 3 homes on about a 1/4 acre. So that's just over 13.25 units per acre. Here we have a 2-family home that's on just shy of 1/5 of an acre. So that is about 10, just over 10 units per acre. And then there's some student housing with just 2 homes on 0.15 acres at about just shy of 14 units per acre. And then lastly, we have a mixed use residential with commercial, 5 homes on just shy of half an acre. So that is 11.6 units per acre. And then at this point, I will hand it over to Mimi, who's going to talk a little bit about what this process is going to look like moving forward. We're at the beginning. These 2 info sessions are the kickstart of this process, and then we can answer questions.
What's the plan for so? Back to the sketch. This is a meeting. Oh, so we can go back and I can talk about. I didn't realize. So initially, when the statute came out, there were guidelines that came out and municipalities all offered the state common zone, and then new guidelines came out. So that was like a year or 1.5 years after the statute. So then the planning board and other entities in town needed to figure out what this meant. And so we attended lots of forums and lots of Zoom info classes to learn what this. So then in August, we started sending out mailers for these 2 info sessions. One was last week, one tonight. In October, we hope to start doing mapping sessions where we'll get a big map and people can come and put stickies on a map and say, this is where we think the zone or zones should go. From there, once we have an idea of where are good places for the zones, we'll start working on the bylaw, which we hope to finish in November and then open public hearings in December. And the plan is to come to annual town meeting with a bylaw proposal to meet our obligation. And this item is on every planning board agenda. So if you think of a question or want to bring something up, you can either come to a meeting or zoom into a meeting and ask a question during that session item. We hope to see you all for our October mapping session. And Lily will take questions. Right. The floor is yours. Yeah.
So, we saw a bunch of things that were ineligible then. It's gathered from that everything else is eligible, including the neighborhoods and homes that we live in.
Yeah, so I have town staff put together this map, and I encourage folks to, at some point come and take a closer look at it, but this shows, if folks can see it, obviously any green space is going to be ineligible. Anything that's marked as orange is going to be ineligible. And that blue represents the floodplain as well as some bodies of water as well. So the majority of what is white is a place that could be considered.
Well, then at least 20% is gonna be that yellow circle.
20% has to go somewhere inside of the yellow circle. So it won't take up the entirety of the yellow circle. It'll actually take up less than a tenth of the yellow circle, but it needs to go somewhere in there.
So 20% has to go in there, but the town could decide they want 100% of it within that circle.
Yeah.
Question?
Yeah.
Well, okay, in the yellow area, you said the minimum area for any project is 5 acres, right?
So the minimum, no, for not any project. The minimum, but that is, I think I know what you're getting at, which is that the minimum district size is 5 acres. So you could theoretically have as many of 10 districts of 5 acres each, as long as 10 of those acres fall within here. So if you wanted, theoretically, you could put 10 acres in one big clump down here and 40 acres in another big clump somewhere else, or you could divvy it up. You could say, we're going to do a bunch of little 5-acre districts. So that doesn't mean that it needs to be one parcel that makes up the entirety of those
Can I just
5
follow up? So
acres.
if you did that in that yellow, just for example, if you
Yeah.
did that in the yellow area, and you've got that 5 acres issue.
Yeah.
You need that the houses down there are very small lots, they're like 4.5 acres at the most. So you need like 15 houses in order to come up with the 5 acres. Do you realize that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the 5 acres can look a lot of different ways depending on where they
Well, that's-
end up. In some places, there's large parcels, in some places there's
To the
small
5
parcels.
acres that the together.
Yes. So we couldn't just say like this parcel here, this parcel here, this parcel here. It needs to be at least in a 5-acre clump.
Needs to be contiguous.
Exactly. Contiguous is the professional way. Clump is my fun way.
How much land inside, let's say, the yellow circle is there that is not already people's homes?
So it doesn't matter if there are homes on the land or
No.
not, because all that matters is the zoning.
Well,
That
I think it
applies
matters
to the land.
homeowner, right? In other words, if you're a homeowner, right, that lives in the yellow circle, right? It makes a difference to you as to whether, this is happening in your house or your neighborhood, whatever the case is, or not. So one option, right, is there land inside the yellow circle, right? That is 5 acres of contiguous land there that could be used. It's privately owned, obviously not public.
Right.
So is the question?
Yeah, I don't have the answer to that question.
Pull up that same graphic.
Sure. Yes.
And sorry, follow-up question
Yeah.
is, there's some land that is publicly owned inside that yellow circle.
Mhm.
That could possibly be sold or privatized in order to make this happen.
Yes.
Correct?
Although that would have to
Go through a
commence
process.
before you districted it. So you couldn't say, this is our district, it's currently publicly owned, but we promise one day we'll sell it. You would have to demonstrate that you were already in the process of trying to do that.
Could everyone identify themselves when they speak, please? Or our
Hi,
notes
Jim.
taker,
Hello,
Jim, your last name, please?
Jim Waddell.
Okay, thank you.
I want to go back here. Yes.
Matt Probst, 31 Woodland. Question just for information, but what is Hopkinton's responsibility here, because half that circle is in them. Do
Yes.
they share an equal burden of having?
They also fall under this law, but because the station is not within their municipal border, they are an adjacent community rather than a commuter rail community.
So.
So about half of that is ineligible space to be used. I mean, that's this.
Well, we can't claim Hopkins
Yeah, so
space,
it's just the top
unfortunately.
half is ours. We have to
Yes.
contribute out of our
Exactly.
half of
So
that
we'll
available
kinda-
space.
And that's not
So,
right.
so really the density, sorry.
The density is much greater.
question- Right, the density of what we need to find 5 acres is half of what a half mile radius, right?
Yeah, it's that 167 acres that are within that half.
Like, can the MBTA station itself have a parking garage with apartments above it, so they don't lose the parking space?
Yeah,
I've seen
so-
done in other communities, so
Yeah.
I think we need to know that.
Right, it would currently be considered to be publicly owned land.
But
So that would have to be a conversation with the MBTA.
but they're allowing it now in other units.
Not
It's
under
sold
this,
off- It's sold off
Yeah.
parking garage
yes,
for multi-story apartments,
yes,
so it could happen. If they
Yeah.
wanted,
if you wanted to pursue that.
could a town, can I follow that up with a question?
Yeah.
For the town of Southborough, if a developer wants to build, and our neighbors to the south,
Mhm.
being good neighbors with the water, could they offer a treatment plant facility use across borders? Since
Honestly,
there is
I-
one about 3 miles down the street.
yeah,
in
that's
Legacy.
that's above my pay grade, but maybe the planning board knows the answers to that question. Could a developer essentially hook into the Hopkinton water source is the question?
No, Hopkinton's not hooking up to Southborough potentially with an IMA. If someone decides to build on the MBTA station, it's allowed, or anywhere in that area, as a good neighbor, could they allow Southborough, the developer, the state, hook up to a treatment plant that already exists at Legacy Farms?
Very good question.
It will get taken down and answered at a future session. So thank you for the question. Yes, Loretta.
I was here at last meeting and I'm still a bit confused. I call it the dome. It's in the dome there. If I were to sell my house, say 1/4 acre. to anyone, they could tear it down and put in how many affordable home apartments on that 1/4 acre.
So
Minimum,
assuming you're in the district.
I'm in a district,
Yeah.
but don't.
Well, not this entire dome is going to be part of the district. The district needs to be placed somewhere within the dome. But it's only gonna make up about 10%.
I understand,
space,
I
yeah.
understand that,
So assuming your property is in that district
right.
and it's a 1/4 acre.
When I sold.
Yeah, you sold.
The developer came in and said, hey, I'm gonna put up a 3-story 12 apartments, is that okay?
They would not be able to do 12 apartments on a 1/4 of an acre. They maximum, if it's exactly a 1/4 of an acre, they would be able to build 3 homes. But they would not be affordable necessarily, unless you choose to put in an affordability requirement.
Well, who does that? I don't need to consume time.
Yeah, no.
Who decides whether it's affordable?
So part of the public process will be having a conversation with the community about, would you like to require that developers put in some share of affordable units? Or would you not like to require that? So that's a decision that the town gets to make.
Planning.
Yeah, with input,
Okay.
planning board with input from the residents, yeah. Yeah,
I got a question. We have a listing or an idea of how many homes within that half-mile radius already are operating as multifamily homes under a special permit?
just to get a sense of kind of like what's on the ground
Like, what's
already.
there already?
Yeah,
So I can pull up residency and show you. I mean, does that sound like a good idea?
yeah, I mean, I think we can. I think the special permit question wouldn't be able to be answered by residency. But there is a website that allows you to look at existing parcels and what is currently on them. So we could.
I would just be interested in knowing, because as far as I'm concerned, I think there are already a bunch of homes in that zone that are multifamily. I mean, my husband and I walk past several every day.
In reading through this,
And-
I think if there are two-family homes, those don't count. So there's some neighborhoods that have two-family homes that would not qualify for this criteria.
So two family does not count. in
Well, so
multifamily.
ultimately, what is on the ground right now, the current buildings really have nothing to do with this. So there could be a parcel that currently has a single family home, but the zoning for the land allows for up to 4. And that is all that the state is looking at. So if you put a single family home on an acre that allows 4 homes, they're not looking at what actually goes on top of it. They're looking at the zoning underneath. So it's not like existing multifamily counts towards anything, because they're not actually looking what's currently on the ground. They're looking at the laws you're applying to the land.
I guess my point is, if there are already houses that are multifamily, it would make sense to rezone those as part of a multifamily district.
Well, it depends on how they were built. If they were built with a special permit, they can't count, because these have to be a district of by right. You still have a little bit of control, but the special permit is gone. So anything we already have that was built with special permit cannot count.
So it can't be rezoned by right, and they,
Oh, it could.
Yeah,
but
it could be
those
rezoned.
units won't really, and the whole point of this, we're not really looking to make a unit out. We're looking to make an area of multifamily zoning, which this town does not have any multifamily.
right, and I guess my point is, why would we rezone single family residents if we already have multifamily residents that could simply be rezoned to accommodate what they're already operating as?
Well, if that's what if when we do the map session, if that's what comes out, that's exactly what we'll do. You know, it's all up to the that we get back.
Just to confirm to make sure I have this right, so this is creating zoning by right districts. If property is within that district, it doesn't necessarily mean that multifamily housing will be built on it. It's just that at some point it can be built
Exactly.
by right. So it's not something that is imminent, there's no time on it. It's just that if there is the opportunity to do that if situation arises.
Exactly. So there is no production requirement. The state is not looking at what actually ends up on these parcels. They just want to see that it's legal to do so if someone chooses. And if you're a property owner whose property falls within this district, it is entirely up to you what you choose to do with it. You can continue to live there or rent it if you're a landlord. You can choose to sell it. That's your choice as an individual.
So we're on Parker Street, right across from the train station, and I think most vulnerable possibly. And my question is, I understand that we don't have to build anything, but what if my elderly neighbor passes away and sells to a developer, which is right next door to me, and they build on that acre 8 units, and now I don't live next to a house? I mean, like, what does that do to my property value, and how is that fair?
So it will actually increase your property value.
No.
I mean, I'm sorry for the loaded question, but
No,
that's why I'm terrified.
Yeah, no, I understand.
I'm terrified of that.
Yeah, and I'm sorry to hear that you're terrified, because I can tell you as someone who does this work and has been doing it for years, that multifamily housing does not bring property values down. It just, there is no data to back it up.
My
I'm not
history
gonna make you,
of a, I know when renters come in, they don't care for a home like a homeowner would. So I've seen it go out, like, there's no talking me into that. I'm sorry, but that's our biggest fear at home. I want to know what our rights, so we are not considered one of the zoning 5 acres inside that dome, like he's saying. I don't want to be considered a multifamily possibility.
you can certainly express that, but
But I don't have the
ultimately,
right.
it's a decision collectively of the town of where it goes. Each individual parcel owner doesn't get to decide,
Can you explain like that, how that's gonna happen? Like, how are you gonna micro target a 5 acre parcel? Like, how in this town is that gonna be done effectively?
So it's not a parcel, it's a 5-acre district, which could include who knows how many parcels.
No, but I'm just saying that, for that target, so,
Yeah.
I mean, certainly this couple doesn't wanna have their house in that. I don't want mine in that, like, who's gonna make that decision at a town meeting?
So over the process of determining this district, there will be a series of workshops, various, sessions like this where people can come together, look at the maps, think about, what are the pros and cons of different areas of town, have some discussion and debate, talk to the planning board. I know that they are continuing as new questions come up, they're continuing to do their research, going back to the state, asking for clarification. It's gonna be an iterative process until, bit by bit, we start to winnow down.
In your matters, like whatever, if you get together and you say, okay, one of these ways, so this matter, though, that's what you want to know. Because I think the main thing about everything is like Southborough, it's a town that we moved there because it's safe, it's peaceful, if you have kids, we all know we need to help you. It's fair, we have this kind of, housing, but the problem is the moment that your housing, you invested, you have this, the moment that it has a housing, people that rent, it's different, the turnover of the people, the city's not gonna be the same. The taxes are high, so like if there is like a family, 3 family, like close to my house, like I live in front of the recreation center, we really worry about it. So what's gonna happen? My taxes going down because there's gonna be more traffic, more people walking, our side's gonna change. And the main reason to live there is because the schools, it's like a little town, everybody knows everyone. So the moment that it's happening a little bit here, it's changed. So our tax is gonna decrease a little bit or increase, because this, I wanna know, because it increase, like we don't fight the city hall because we love to live there, the fees and everything. But the moment that these things start to happen, things gonna change. It's honestly.
I mean, things will change no matter what. And it's a matter of what kind of change do you want to see, because no community stays exactly the same forever. People grow up, they move away, people die, new people are born, the world changes. Southborough will change in the next 20 to 30 years, no matter what, because that's just how the world works. But it's a question of what do you want that change to look like? And that's really what the conversation needs to be as we look at what this district should be. But change is scary when you don't know what something is gonna look like.
And when you talk about rentals, it doesn't have to be a rental unit, it could be a condo unit, it could be a duplex, which size is a condo. So these are all things that we're looking for input on. That was one thing you said, you don't want the rentals. Too. So,
There's no guarantee, that's what scares. The assumption is, I mean, of course, that it's gonna be a rental. I'll put a percentage on it, I think we say 50-50. I don't want them to take that risk. I don't want more people, it's already crowded enough next to that train station. I'm already dealing with traffic when the train comes in and out. Now I have to deal with 50 more apartments right next door.
yeah.
To drive around. My kids can't go outside on the street because there's a lot more traffic, picking people up and, leaving. And I've had apartments, my parents had apartments. We've had a lot of issues in the past that involve police. Nothing against renters. I was a renter in Newton for 5 years before I moved here. But I also know I didn't care about my home like I do now. It's just. It's just
But again,
common sense.
we need to display the plaque. We don't need to build it, and I don't think homeowners like you would want to sell. You want to keep your neighborhood as it is. We just have to present the zone.
Right, and that's why I'm here. I just don't want my area to be part of the zone.
Yeah, so
We
that's
can't
right
see
there
that.
shows 10 acres.
And
There's a bubble.
I think what really hurts is Hopkinton and Ashland aren't part of this. But aren't we doing Hopkinton like a huge favor with the water? If we negotiate.
Ashland has a commuter rail station, and Hopkinton, it's obviously right on the border, but they are still all of the communities around you, this law also applies.
Yeah, and so they're dealing with their area, but as our dome, as our little yellow circle.
Yeah.
Ashland's exempt, and so is Hopkinton, so.
If I could just say, so as far as Hopkinton has to still do 750 units, 15 per acre, it just doesn't have to be contiguous to the train station. So their town is still gonna do it. Ashland has to do 1,124 units. How does that work out at 15 an acre if there's only 50 acres? Just pull this from the state's website.
That's the minimum, that's the minimum land.
So, okay.
It's a percentage. of
Because
the-
we're a small town, so there's still gonna be an impact in the other towns as well. It's just not 10 acres on top of the train station.
Right.
It's gonna have the overall
So there's
impact.
there's different levels. In Boston, there's, what do you call it, the MBTA trains.
Yeah.
And out here, we are the commuter rail. So we are a commuter rail community. Hopkinton would be an adjacent community. And even though they don't have the station there, it was, what was it actually, you said was so high?
1124.
Yeah, so they'll have to do more because of,
They have their.
Ashland has commuter rails.
Oh, they do. They do have open around.
It would be great if we went back to this gentleman's
Yeah.
question, because I think it's gonna be
Ashland's
important for all of us. to
1124,
have Clarity on how the decision get made, so it's kind of general to say, oh yeah, we're gonna make it as a group, well. What's gonna happen? Okay, is the question, is there gonna be a vote?
Yeah,
Right.
so
Is
ultimately,
there gonna be a vote by whom, right? And how is it gonna be decided, right? How are the options gonna be laid out? Because I think that's what we all need to know so that we can prepare for it.
Yeah.
And try to make the best decision.
do we want
And
to
then-
bring up that
Yeah.
timeline that demonstrated where we're at in the public process? The last slide. Yeah.
Sorry, there's one other sort of part.
Yeah.
You know, two sort of parts of this observation. The second is that I noticed in the materials that I looked at that there are some funding that we would be eligible for that we don't participate. But I think it's incumbent on all of us to know, all right, well, what funding is that? What do we normally get? And what do we lose if we don't comply?
Yeah.
Right?
So right now, I will say that of the 177 towns, 176 are pursuing compliance. There's only one town at this point that is not pursuing compliance. That is the town of Holden. And they do have a lawsuit that has been brought against them for that non-compliance. So there are two primary consequences of non-compliance. The first is legal action from the state. And the second is the loss of access to funding from 17 different state grants. Some of the major ones are MassWorks, which funds a lot of infrastructure projects. I think we have the whole list. If you turn to the compliance and the law page, there's a whole list. These are all the new, so this is not all 17. These are the ones that were most recently announced. But you can see up top, there's Housing Choice, the Local Capital Projects Fund, MassWorks Infrastructure. And they also recently created something called Housing Works Infrastructure Program. That was just funded with $25 million in June. So altogether, we're looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in grant funding that goes out every year. You would have to look back at what you received historically, but I think it's also important to look at, this new list of grants includes a really broad array of things, including around, municipal vulnerability preparedness, local acquisitions for natural diversity, to be able to conserve conservation land, rural and small town development, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not just about what you've received in the past, but also what projects do you have coming down the pipeline and what kind of funding might you need 1 to 3 to 5 years from now.
I think we'd be very helpful for all of us as we go through the next section. Here's what we got in the past.
Yeah.
Here's what we think that we would like to get forward from
Yeah.
this. So at least it puts some context.
Yeah, especially looking at, your housing production plan, your master plan. What are some of the projects or policies that were proposed there that might require this grant funding to actually execute them? I just want to make sure we go to who haven't spoken yet. Yeah.
Is this more about allowing zoning? Or is it then the state saying we have to build a certain number of houses that fit the requirement? Because if it's just about zoning, we can say, yeah, we're gonna zone it, but then we can put so many restrictions in the house that's being built, that they can't build that 2-family, 3-family, or 4-family, between the setbacks, we have no sewer system, we're all septic. So with that, you put a 4-family house on a chunk of land, you have to have the septic to back it up.
If that doesn't happen, it's not buildable. They cannot perfect has all those rules still apply.
Yeah, so kind of what I'm saying is, great, we can say, okay, we're gonna zone it in, no problem, there it is, it's zoned in. Can't build a house, because it doesn't, that, trying to put the house on that piece of land, won't fit any of the requirements. For multifamily, can you back to
I
single
think
family
this brings
house?
up the fear of other people where they're gonna buy a couple of lots together and.
Yeah, but yeah, pretty much there's not a lot of free land in Southborough, so you're gonna have to talk to him, her and her, and just sell all their houses together. For the builder to have enough land to put their house, I'm assuming that, the 3 of them own right next to each other. Otherwise, you back to, okay, you got a 1/2 acre of land, you can't put a 4-family house on that.
It doesn't work right
Yeah.
now. It doesn't meet the setbacks.
I mean, because there's not much buildable land left in Southborough, once you start getting into the wetlands and all that.
Well, and again, it's not an effort in building. Effort in zone.
Yeah, so I mean, we can just zone it and say, okay, we're zoned, but you can't put anything in.
So the question
bad.
is, can we, in other words, if it is zoned that way, but you know you can never build there, does that qualify? Does that meet the requirements?
That's a good question. So if you have as part of your site plan review requirements that are so clearly absurd as to be overtly obstructionist, that district will not be approved by the state. So if you're saying, there has to be 300-foot setbacks and it can only be 1 story and it can only cover this much of the lot, if you put so many requirements on it that makes it clear that it's actually physically impossible to build, that will not be approved.
Yeah, but with Southborough being all septic, it's gonna be tough to put a house in. A multi-family house.
Yeah.
It's not like the towns that have sewer systems that, yeah, you can just slam something down and it ain't gonna matter because you got a sewer system. We got septic and we got wetlands and everything, so.
I mean, I think it is like.
Even if we make it so that it could go on there, it's still probably not gonna pass.
I think it is likely that you would see very, very slow growth with all of those constraints. Zoning like this, it takes decades to actually see what the zoning actually allows to be created. It is from my perspective, way too slow of a process, but from your perspective, it's probably.
And if they're looking for affordable housing, there's enough office complexes that are sitting empty, just convert them over.
They can do that. They can
Yeah.
revamp something like that.
So we should be, as a town, we should be kind of encouraging the developers to develop those versus taking what little land's left and put multifamily houses on it, because you can fit way more people into that office complex.
Yeah.
And now it's on a chunk of land that's not being used.
It's empty land though. Empty land, which that would get built.
Yeah. I just want to make sure anyone who hasn't spoken, then I'll come back.
Well, I was going to say, you mentioned that only one town is in litigation, but it's a little early in the process for towns to make that decision whether they are going to litigate and whether or not their services can support this increase first. So I think by saying there's only one town now, that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. We're a little early in the process, as you said, for towns to have to look at this and find out whether or not they can handle this increased growth, and then they'll make the decision. So I think we're a little early in the process to say Holden's the only town.
It is certainly possible that some will not. So I want to go back actually, because we never got to an important part of your question, which is how does this happen? It would be a vote at town meeting in the spring. So town meeting would determine whether or not to pass this bylaw. So it is possible that in other communities, they will bring a bylaw to town meeting and it will not pass. But I can say as someone who's working currently in 44 of these communities and is in regular contact with consultants working in other communities, every single community except for Holden is actually in the process of drafting their district, doing this kind of outreach. They are earnestly moving forward, and it will ultimately come down to the vote. And so we'll see when the deadline comes around, how many votes we're able to get that passed at town meeting. But in terms of who is actively pursuing it, everyone except for Holden is beginning that process. Yeah.
Yeah, let me follow
Sorry,
up.
the gentleman behind you, and then I'll come to you.
Okay, Dave. My question, this is all gonna fly, mark my words. Because I was on the MBTA study committee, and no matter what we said, This guy named Rocco said, don't worry, we're gonna do what we want. So you're gonna need the property to put these buildings on.
He's not.
How is that gonna be acquired? Because Rocco promised us back when they wanted to put the commuter rail in. Property would be taken by eminent domain if it had to be.
There is no eminent domain involved in this. This is just zoning. And if your property falls within the district, it is still entirely up to you what to do with it, just like it is today. Because the reality is that anyone who's a property owner here, you are already constrained by some kind of zoning. It's not like we don't have zoning and we're bringing in this new concept. Everyone here who has a piece of property, that property has zoning laws attached to it. Right now, in a lot of cases, those zoning laws are very restrictive, and it tells you can do one thing and one thing only with your property, and that is build a single family home. Allowing folks to have more options with what they do with their property expands that opportunity, but does not in any way diminish the individual power of each property owner to decide what's right for them and for their person. Yeah.
So if this is voted down in the town meeting, do we lose the compliance benefits?
Yes. So if it is voted down at town meeting, that is when the grant funding would go away, and that is when the potential for legal action comes up. Anyone that hasn't spoken yet? Yes.
Procedural question, perhaps. Sorry, Zach reviews. Will the zoning districts follow existing boundary or features, or will it be somewhat more of an overlay in the sense, sort of like our Route 9 district, where it's a distance off of a road?
That's a good question. It is an overlay district.
So it might not necessarily observe parcel to parcel.
It's likely gonna follow parcel lines because basically it's
Okay.
dual zone lots are.
Frustrating.
And then you, and then I'm gonna go back to you.
Yeah, in your packet here, it says that the district contains a minimum of 50 acres in area. It represents 0.3%. And you say that the South Row is approximately 17.1 square miles. Is that square miles of buildable land or existing building?
Just land.
That's just the town.
So it
Just the
does not, but it still does not include reservoirs.
Well, that probably does.
Oh, that does include.
That probably does, it just the town.
So it's just the
cares.
whole boundary of the town.
Yeah, this maps shows all these excluded lands.
Excluding all the blue and the green
Yeah,
and
and
the
the
orange.
orange.
So what percentage is of just the white space?
I didn't see that map, I'm sorry.
But the white space, just eyeballing, it looks like it's probably 25% of the total, right? I think 23% of the land area of the town is water, right?
I think that's about right. Is that about right? I actually looked through the master plan to get those numbers. Let's see, I know they're there.
Yeah. So that's a good, at the next session, we should have some more information on that. Yeah.
Are we already looking at, as a town, large tracts of land that could be rezoned to meet this requirement? One that comes to mind is the Crystal Pond property.
So, yes, that's, I guess if you can say
So-
everything's on the table.
So everything's on the table, and in October, we're gonna start the mapping, and look for feedback from everybody, and that's how we'll come to the districts, and then from there we'll start writing the zone. And that will be, there'll be public hearings all through just from starting in December, hopefully through town meeting to get input on the zone. So nothing's
That's
on
what I'm asking.
the table right now.
Are there any, slam dunks? Are there any givens that we should, go into that planning, already assuming, hey, this is a large tract of land that could be rezoned?
There are large, so the pros of that is that it's a large tract of land and it doesn't butt any homes. But the con is that the chances are that
It's gonna get built.
it's gonna get built and it'll get built rather quickly. So you'll have a lot of units on board. Yeah.
It makes better sense to zone it, to get that district done. It's raw land and I've been getting phone calls.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of this is a conversation on priorities and just weighing the kind of trade-offs of potential areas for the district. And also looking at, you know, if we choose this district, what are we likely to get out of it? You know, if you have a district that has a lot of small parcels, you're not gonna see as many larger buildings. So if it's, you know, a half acre parcel, you're not gonna see as big of a building as if it was a larger parcel. So thinking through the kind of and what your priorities are.
I just say one thing too, like, I think when we think of the larger parcels as well, that's something you can almost guarantee will be built. So while it may be easier to put it there, you may be looking at 600 units being built. And I just want everyone to consider the ramifications of that as well, to the schools with the studies being done, and to kind of look at it as a whole picture, not just the easiest place that it might go, but how might your services be impacted? Might we need another fire truck? Might we need, you know, there's a school study going on right now. Might that impact the schools? You know, potentially looking to downsize a school, will that not be possible? You know, I just think there's a lot of moving parts that make into picking an easy track to make that happen. Well, I agree, it would certainly be simple when we could call it a day. But again, just holistically look at what the ramifications to services and the town itself, it might be as well.
But at the same time, if that tract of land is already gonna be developed, why not? Make it part of this so that it counts towards this requirement.
So it is a perfect idea, but I don't, and again, I'm new on the planning board, me and Debbie jump in. Our current zoning does not allow for 15 units per acre. They wouldn't be able to get number of units in our regular zoning that they would with this.
So we're opening ourselves up to higher density housing by doing so.
Exactly. By zoning raw land, we're gonna get the building. By zoning developed land, it's put off for a while. And there's no requirement to build, but if you find raw land, those developers are already. Where those are the zoning, you don't know yet. So one of the other things I wanted to bring up that Lily pointed out, we didn't talk about, was that we can have different densities in different districts. It has to average out between the districts to 15. So there could be one in the south area where the dome is that everybody's talking about. There could be 10 acres, maybe 20 acres in another one. As long as it works out to be 15 units by right, we can do that. So there's options out there. This is why we want all these people, you know, more people thinking about it, the better ideas we're gonna get. And I'll just add to that, I mean, this is your choice.
Yes.
Realistically, this is creating a zoning in our town that affects everyone here. So make sure that your voice is heard, and if that may be the right decision, but again, just everybody, please stay involved in this and try to pick the zones that hopefully we can come up with something this town, you know, that will work for everybody and be good for the town as well.
Just one more related follow-up on that. Madison Place as an example, what is the density there? Is that 12, 15?
I think it's like a little over 10.
Interesting.
But again, that's still back. 40 feet. Oh, 40 feet. It's still a comprehensive permit. Yeah. So.
Anyone who hasn't spoken yet, just want to get a chance? No, okay, go back to you.
Yeah, two questions. One, can we make that 15 unit a maximum? Is that's purview?
That is, yeah,
to not
that is the
allow-
maximum.
I'm just saying, but if someone were able to make a proposal to do something more than 15 per
We don't
acre,
have to
can,
allow it.
we don't have to allow it?
You just have to allow 15 by right.
Yeah.
And. Break it up, into what is it?
Yeah, across someone's, but
But
we
again,
could
if they
limit.
can't- they have a 5 acre park. It doesn't first. All they can do is 10 units. That's all they're gonna be allowed to do. You know, so all those important public safety factors, you know, will stay part of the process.
So 15 is the ceiling.
Is it the ceiling? I mean, it's by right.
It's the
up
ceiling
to
by,
15.
it's the ceiling by right. So it would be up to you
So
to
it's the
decide
minimum
what
and the
happens
maximum.
after. It's not the minimum. You could zone a parcel, let's say it's a 1 acre parcel.
Yeah.
You could put it in your zoning district, say, hey, you're allowed to build up to 15 units per acre here if you want. And you might have someone come in and be like, nah, I'd rather just have a really big single family home on an acre, and I can afford to do that. And that's an option. So
That doesn't
15
hurt the town in any way.
15 is the
Just so
ceiling,
you
not
know.
the floor.
And is part of your 2019 plan and the 2021 plan? Like, what were the projections actually for the growth of South Grove? For the next 10 years, and are we able to afford? Like, a massive. 750 units, which could be 1,500 more kids per the school, if you have 2 kids per unit.
I will say a few things. So I want to make sure that folks don't get confused by that 750 number, because that's the unit capacity. That does not mean you would have 750 additional units on top of what you already have. So what they want to see is that the zoning district, you have to zone 50 acres. Allowed up to 15 units per acre. 50 times 15 is 750. So the zoning would have to theoretically legalize that amount of density on that land, but that is not going to be on top of what's already there. So you might see a single family home become a 2 or 3 family home. You might see a 3 family home become a 4 family home.
I get that, I'm just saying, like, I mean, did we think of a net positive scenario where we could have 750 more units in the town of South Grove? If someone did offer up a zone that was complete open space and Billy DePietri comes in and puts up, 750 units in 12 months, like, what's the deal? Like, can we?
That would be miraculous. I've never seen that.
That's a long word.
Yeah,
I don't know.
you will make global news if you pull that off, because I've never seen anything like that, Matt. I will say, when it comes to the school enrollment question, historically, more housing did equal more students. That's been sort of common knowledge for a long time. But in recent decades, as people of my generation have had fewer and fewer kids, there's been a study done of the entire state, and what they're finding is that on average, there are 0.4 students for every new home. So that kind of common sense knowledge of the past really does not apply anymore.
Let's say it's 750, and it's 315 kids. Right? What does that mean? I think that's where you're getting at.
I'm just curious, did we plan for something like this in the plan, or is this gonna be throw out the old plan and think of something new?
This is new. It came out when we were finishing up the master. So we haven't planned for these now for this particular statute. The 750 units is just what we have to allow. That doesn't mean they're all gonna come along at once. And that was, the downside of, off zoning of vacant property. But just to give you an idea, Madison Place, which is over 200 units, there's 14 kids there. That's it.
And I was gonna add on to that, saying that a lot of these multifamily units that get built, if they do have kids, they're usually very, very young, because by the time the kids get in school, they want to own that single family home. And that's kind of a true thing. I know a gentleman that built 32 unit condo that everybody was worried was going to really affect the school system, and he had 6 in different locations around the state. None of them had kids. That was just the fact that we were all shocked. It just, nobody wants to raise a kid in the playgrounds, yard, so. And I have a paper that I've been putting up on our website that has a lot of these studies there. And it'll show you that it really does not affect the value of the homes next to it. It actually helps in the long run, but don't take my word, you can read the studies. I've been looking, and I'll be adding more and more to that planning board website as we move along.
Yes. Fine, stand up again. All of these numbers are based on 2020 housing stock. Another 7 years out of change. Per down. Tomorrow. Does that 750 change? Who makes the determination in 2030?
It was 2020 was the census.
Right.
That's where we're gonna get the numbers. So every 10 years, we get a new, that's mostly for affordable housing. We have to make our 10%. So we're at a certain 10% right now. And in 10 years, when they do the next census, that number's gonna change, and it's gonna change our affordability requirements.
But
For this, it has nothing to really do with the 750.
But for this district, it's not a moving target. It's one law with one requirement, and once you meet it, you're,
And we'll get that right, right?
Yeah, you guys get the bylaw.
And the other, and the second question, the state is expanding the MBTA in Springfield. Could that change our classification here?
We'd probably add in more towns.
yeah, it wouldn't change anything for existing towns. It might add in new towns.
But it wouldn't increase the number.
No,
Grant Barrington. I'm not necessarily suggesting we do this, but with the conversation around Madison Place, so there's already existing multifamily. I don't believe they're zoned for multifamily. So could you potentially zone on existing 40Bs to satisfy this zone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I would guess that the 40B is not compliant with your existing zoning, because that's sort of how 40Bs work.
They bypass it.
Yeah, like, that's sort of their whole thing. Yeah.
On your fact sheet again, I'm confused about the 15 units.
Yeah.
You said maximum per
Max.
acre.
That's the maximum.
This fact sheet says allows for a minimum of 15 units per acre.
Well, I get, what the state is requiring is that you can't say 10 units per acre. They want to see that 15 units per acre, but you as a community can make the decision not to go past that.
But to me, that leaves it open that you can go more than 15.
Oh, I mean, if a community was like, we want to do 50 units per acre, that's totally up to you, but the state wants to see that
But this
15
defines
units.
a zoning district. Minimum 15.
Minimum 15 allowed, not minimum 15 built.
But you said earlier, maximum 15 per acre.
Maximum of 15 built.
You can't go any higher than 15, but if it, like, again, if it's a big lot, it doesn't work properly, you can still maybe do 4, maybe you can do 6.
You know, it's incredibly confusing, you know, you've got written down here, minimum of 15 units an acre. On another page, you've got another number, what's it, maximum? It's just incredibly confusing, you know. I'm just saying fact, isn't it? It's very confusing. This fact sheet doesn't conform with what you're talking about here.
Okay, we can review that. Just to reiterate, so the law states that your district must allow a minimum of 15 units per acre by right. That does leave the door open for communities who want to go past that, which a lot of communities are choosing to go beyond what the minimum requirement is. That leaves space for communities to make that decision. But assuming that you all stick to the 15, and you decide this is our district and we will allow up to 15 units per acre, that sets your ceiling at 15. So no one can come in and build more than 15 units on an acre. So the state is saying you can't go less than 15, but you could go more. If you decide we're sticking with 15, then that becomes the ceiling.
Does that change though the dynamics of you said we could, it's an average? So
No,
then
it's
does that
15
prohibit
versus
someone
10.
else from maxing out above 15? Yeah, I'm just saying the math would have to work. I mean, you're saying someone could build 30 and another one could build 5 and average of 15,
Yes.
like within the zone, but are we saying you can't build 30 over there, you can only build 15?
No, you can absolutely build 30 over there if you guys decide that's gonna be.
If the
part of
town
bylaw.
decides,
If
if the town says no way,
And then you
it's
have
gotta be
five.
15 and no one gets more than 15 per acre.
And then it depends. You know, in the town where you are, it could be lower.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Let's get back to this issue. I mean, the fact of the matter, you've written a law and you've applied it to. Well, someone has, bureaucrats have, and they've applied it across all these communities of all different types. And here you have a rural community with single family homes next to a station. Now, there are many countries where they have train stations in the country with no houses around them at all. You know, this imposition of a state or rule is just completely arbitrary. Southborough has single family homes next to a station. But you're suggesting you're going to put these people in harm's way by saying your area is obligated to come up with 10 acres of multifamily, whether you like it or not. I mean, that's imposition, it's state imposition of arbitrary rule. It's ridiculous. Number one. Number two, Why doesn't Hopkins have 10 acres? Why aren't they obligated? They're right next to the station. They're right abutting the station.
They are also.
10 acres within a half a mile.
They have to do 50 acres, but they can choose where. it
Well,
goes.
why aren't they obligated to do 10
Because
acres?
the
With...
station is not within their.
Okay, so that's an arbitrary rule, isn't it? It's completely arbitrary.
I would say it's pretty consistent across the entire.
They're
region.
right next to the station, aren't they? They're right next to it.
No, I understand, but
Property next to the stations, in that circle.
yeah, and they, I mean, frankly, they know. I think the smart thing for them to do would be to put their district near the station. But the reality is that a border is a border, and if they make an exception for Southborough, then that, or Hopkinton, that opens up a whole can of worms. And so,
I think the reality is you've written a law which doesn't comply with local reality. You've written an arbitrary law with arbitrary rules which don't apply here. You're imposing multifamily housing on a single family area. That's not fair. You know, why is it, you know, when you go to Quincy, the thing makes sense. Give me some example of other towns with a situation like us. What are they doing? Rural towns.
Drake-it is complying, Townsend is complying, all kinds of rural.
Do they have single family houses
Yes.
around the station?
Yep.
And they're gonna rezone all those single family areas.
Some
Well,
portion
they're
of
gonna
it.
have a riot on their hands, aren't they? That's what's gonna happen.
No, actually, a lot of communities are taking up this cause and are in favor of it, and every
it's not wrong,
community
are
is
they?
different. Like I said, I'm working in 44 communities of very different scales, different parts, spread pretty evenly across the entire region. And you know, everyone has their own little quirks that they have to work around. Maybe they have a lot of conservation area right next to their station. Everyone sort of has their own puzzle that they need to put together. But again, I did not write this law. I'm not a legislator. I don't work for the state. I'm just here to help, you know, make sure people understand what this means, what it looks like, to support the planning staff in doing that effort as well. And this law was crafted over many years. It was not just people throwing paint up against a wall. There were countless conversations with municipal staff, with residents, with, you know, nonprofits, with, you know, community development corporations. This was put together over many years with an incredible amount of research. And I recognize that no law is perfect. I don't think there's ever been a law written in the history of the world that gets every single tiny detail perfectly right, because it applies to a large swath of the population, and every individual person, every parcel, every community has their own unique elements. But this was not done in a vacuum. And I can say that you have many communities that are in very similar situations to you in terms of your existing housing that you see on the ground, in terms of things like not having sewer. Tons and tons of MBTA communities don't have sewer. So you are by no means alone.
Yeah, so originally, David, our obligation was all 50 acres within a half mile.
Yeah,
So it's gotten better,
it's gotten better, but it isn't perfect.
but Lily didn't write the law.
Yeah,
Anyway, we're
but my-
all in the same.
But my point is, you know, another solution to this is to amend the state law, isn't it?
Well, and again,
That's what should be done, because it's not really applicable in our town. When we don't, certain areas of single family, don't want multifamily, period. It's not applicable here. You need to amend the state law to make it more applicable. That's my point.
It's not the planning job's board to amend the state law. In
I
fact,
know it isn't, but we can suggest it. We do have state legislators, don't we?
Several visions due to comments coming from municipalities that are having trouble with it. And a lot of them were adding opportunities for a town to either become, you know, compliant with their affordable housing goal, or to allow mixed use. You could do this along Route 9 and keep the businesses and add housing above. You know, there's just so many opportunities, and you really have to look at it that way.
Yes, you, Marguerite Landry, could you please just tell me, what is the problem that this law is trying to solve?
a lack of housing availability for people who cannot afford a $1.37 million single home.
It's nothing to do with the station.
Has nothing to do with the railroad?
So the idea behind putting some portion of this housing near transit is that when housing is near transportation, it makes it possible for folks to get around without needing a car for every single aspect of their day. So someone who maybe takes the commuter rail into the city for work, rather than having to drive from some other part of town to get to the commuter rail, park their car, require more and more parking, the more people who use it. If you live across the street or a couple blocks away from that commuter rail station, there's no reason for you to drive your car there and take up another parking space. So the logic behind putting it near transportation is largely around that.
Two questions that I have on that. One, if you're down in the yellow bubble, there's nothing there that you can reach without a car. You can't get to the supermarket, drugstore, school, nothing. And the second question is, are we seeing the impact of a failed housing policy in the city of Boston?
This is a regional problem and it's not Boston's job to provide all the housing for the entire state. Every community has been underproducing housing since the 70s. A lot of zoning changes were made in particularly suburban communities around the state in the 1970s that made it much, much harder to build anything other than a single family home. Since then, we have seen a rapid decline in our housing production and a rapid increase in housing costs, a rapid increase in homelessness, a rapid increase in people leaving the state because they can't afford housing here. We have a severe housing shortage and every single community needs to be a part of addressing that.
But I'm not seeing why that's connected with the railroad.
Because of the goals of building housing near transit. And it's not exclusively near the railroad, some portion of it is. But the idea is that communities that have a commuter rail station have a really precious resource that they have access to. And that more people should be able to share in that resource.
Question on the law, or why is Hopkinton exempt having to do the 5 acres? Like, why are we being punished? Is it just because we're a commuter rail town?
Hopkinton is not exempt. They have this.
But they have, so they don't have to have 5 within
Yeah,
that
it's
circle?
in our town boundaries, so we are required, so they're adjacent, they still have to do their 50 acres.
Yeah, I'm just wondering why they don't have to do 5 with us, because technically they're within the boundary, or they're within the dome, or whatever you want to call it. Like, who made the law that said Hopkinton doesn't have, it's all on Southborough to get those 5 acres, not on Ashland and Hopkinton, even though
So Ashland.
they have their own issue.
They have their
So
own.
I'm targeting Hopkinton that we're already doing a
Well,
favor
so
with the water.
The guidelines are based on different classifications. We're a commuter rail town because the commuter rail station is within South.
Is that part of the law though, originally?
Yes, that is the law, it's all.
I thought there was a board making decisions and they knocked Hopkinton off. They were
No.
They're
one.
not knocked off. They're an adjacent community. They're required to
I
have
heard
50
that.
acres.
Yeah, Hopkinton's a part of this, Ashland's a part of this, Westboro is a part of this, all of your neighbors are a part of this as well.
Yeah, I think everybody's concern is that's really congested. Finding 5 acres, well, 5 together, right, within the dome?
Yeah. 5 acre
Together.
cluster.
Oh,
But doesn't that illustrate the absolute arbitrariness of your law, you know? if
I would
one-
like you to stop calling it my
No,
law,
no, but
please.
if 1 acre had been within Hopkinton, if 1 acre had been in Hopkinton, Hopkinton would have to have 10 acres of zoning multifamily, wouldn't it?
What do you mean if 1
If
acre? had
1
been-
acre of the station land had been across the river,
coming down, all right.
in fact, doesn't MBTA own some land in Hopkinton? Do they?
Hopkinton doesn't have a station within.
I
their
know,
borders.
but doesn't MBTA own property in Hopkinton across the river?
That's exactly. They don't.
I don't know why MBTA would own land if there's no.
Because they
MBTA
bought that
station.
whole parcel.
There's a parking lot.
Anyway, I'm just making a point. It's just completely arbitrary. You know, a line. Why aren't they obligated? Because some bureaucrat made up this bloody law.
They are obligated, the law
But they
applies to
don't
them,
have to have 5 acres, 10 acres within so many feet.
but they still have to have 50
I
acres.
know, make a point.
Lily, why don't we, there's other people with their hands up too, let's make sure everybody gets a chance to talk.
Yeah.
I just want to say, this is not her law. Okay, so let's not.
I
let's say
know,
her.
it's not.
She's here to help
I'm not
us.
aiming at her.
She's here to
aiming at
help
your
us interpret
opinion.
it and deal with the ramifications of the law. And if we have issues with the law, we
Yeah.
should write our legislatures, try to opinion,
Right.
but she can't do anything about it.
I know. What she can convey the message.
I don't work for the
Not-
state.
You don't.
I don't. I said that at the
And
beginning.
who do you work for?
I work for Citizens Housing and Planning Association. It's a nonprofit advocacy organization. My job is in community education. I've been contracted by 44 communities to do exactly this. I go in, I share what the law is, how it works, what it might look like in your community. I gather your questions. I consult with the planning staff on how they can incorporate your questions into their community engagement process. My job is to educate people, to get their input, and to support the staff in doing the most robust, effective engagement process they can. I don't work for the state. I had no job in drafting this law. I would never call it a perfect law, but I deeply believe in the goals of the law. I strongly believe that we need more housing in every community across the state. And that is a deeply held value that I have that I'm not gonna. True, I agree with this law, but it's not.
So last few questions, so Lily doesn't miss her train.
These are also all the communities that are involved.
Yes, so I really encourage you guys to go to the Southborough planning page, where you'll get the links to the various presentations we've done, some of those educational materials that Colleen was referencing. You can see this map of all the communities that are impacted, and their category. For folks who are just curious, where else this is happening. Yeah, in the back.
Yes, I'm probably dictating a dead horse, but that dome bugs me. The reason why it bugs me is because it's mandated for us. Small area. He's totally right. It's congested. I was fuzzy on the limitations. He said 15. What is the ultimate? Because you were a little fuzzy on that. I'm saying that in that area, they're forcing rentals or whatever to be close to the station. I understand that. But they're also giving a signal to these contractors, hey, we're gonna make a lot of money there. We'll buy up little lots of land. We'll wait, we'll be patient, and we'll build these gigantic home, rentals or whatever. And the town isn't gonna be able to stop them because they're gonna have the ability, they'll sue you to the end of the earth. They'll say, we bought the land, we'll get it perked, we'll do what we have to. They'll spend money, they'll probably even put sewerage in our neighborhood, we don't have sewerage. But
That sounds like a good thing.
no, but I'm saying your limit, the limit is bugging me. I understand you're looking right at that bubble and you're making sure we have mandated. I don't hear mandated on, if it was Sears Road, and God bless Sears Road, you put them up there. How do you think that would go over?
So there's an additional 40 acres that may go on elsewhere or on President.
I understand. I totally understand that. And they say, well, the town will decide that. We're a small group. The town got the north side as well. You don't think the north side is gonna say, oh, that's a good spot for those. Let's keep pushing it that way. That's the way it is in this town. You know that. And I'm not, God, as I say, $1 million homes, $10 million, great. I'm a capitalist. I think that's great. But it looks like you're picking on the dome. And all this stuff about Hopkinton, I totally agree. I don't understand. I know what they're not mandated, but you throw a stone, you're in Hopkinton. They got more access to the parking lot than we do.
Yes.
I mean, it's just, it looks unfair on the surface. Now, I hope if this goes to a town meeting or whatever it goes to, we're gonna lose. That little area is gonna lose.
Probably more people in that little area than all Sears roads to show up.
I'm just saying that, but the limit is unlimited, is really what you should be saying, because it really is unlimited. You're not gonna be able to stop the builders, starting small, going into neighborhoods, Stockwell, hey, tear those homes down, we'll put up a nice big revenue bearing operation. It's almost
Well,
like,
if you're a capitalist, you should love that.
Yeah.
except when it's in my backyard.
Capitalism ends at the property line. I do unfortunately have to call it a night. As a great lover of the commuter rail, I will be taking it home this evening. But I encourage you to keep reaching out. Check out the website on the South Borough Planning Board page. And we'll see you next time.
An email. Thank you, everyone. We'll get this together.
I digress. And I would say. So, yeah, I know.
I gotta grab these.
Thank you.